Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at the Mannoroth encounter in the Hellfire Citadel on the 6.2 PTR.
And yes, this fight is epic. It is a long fight and it is really cool. It consists of you fighting Mannoroth in his skeletal form, and then he slowly gets more and more bulky and he gets his flesh back and he's destroying pillars and just killing you all. Yeah. It's awesome. Really cool fight. Here's the second to last fight that you will probably be doing in the instance, and it does take place on the top of Hellfire Citadel with all the roof all mangled off and there's like pillars everywhere. It's just really cool.
Now with all these PTR videos that me and Alex make, they are just previews. We're just all going to discuss how the bosses work and perhaps give a little bit of feedback, but this is not a guide. If you do want a guide, that will be released within the first week as soon as 6.2 does come out, and there will be a link to that in the description of the video as well as in the comments, so look out for that.
Now, as it's a long fight, we might as well get straight into it and we'll talk about phase 1. Now, Mannoroth in this phase, he is a pile of bones on the floor. He isn't active, but instead you have to deal with 3 feline summoners. Now, these summoners do not have any abilities. Instead, each of these summoners are responsible for summoning a particular type of ad. And when you defeat one of these summoners, that ad that they spawn will no longer be summoned in this phase. And we think, not entirely sure, that the other leftover summoners will start summoning their ads more frequently.
Now, probably the most dangerous sort of summoner out of the 3 is probably the right-hand one, because he summons the Doomlords, and the Doomlords are an absolute pain in the arse. Now, the way that the Doomlords are actually summoned is that a debuff is placed on a random player. It's actually a curse called Curse of the Legion. This debuff lasts around 12 seconds. Once it finally times out, the Doomlord will spawn, or if you just instantly dispel that player, the Doomlord will also spawn. That player will take a little bit of shadow damage, so you probably want to shield them up just in advance. But apart from that, you just dispel them, the Doomlord will spawn. Now, the Doomlords have a passive ability called Doom Spike that makes that every time they land a melee hit on the tank, it will apply a single debuff, and this just stacks up and up and up. When the debuff finally expires, you'll take 35k shadow damage per stack. So if you have like stupidly high stacks, so you have 20 stacks, you're going to take 700k damage.
Yeah, exactly. So either you want the Doomlord to die before the stacks get too high, or you just want to be swapping on the stacks, I don't know, around 6 or 8. Normally, because we killed this summoner so quickly, we normally only had like 1 Doomlord, but say you did have a couple of them up, you may need to tank switch.
He'll also place even more debuffs on random targets called Mark of Doom. This makes it so if these targets take any damage at all, the Mark of Doom will be removed and it will just deal a large amount of shadow damage to anyone within 20 yards. But if the player doesn't take any damage at all within the duration of this debuff, which is around 15 seconds, they'll just die instantly. So the idea is, if you get this Mark of Doom debuff, you do need to take some damage just to remove it. But you need to make sure, of course, you're not near any other players, because, yeah, that would be bad.
Now, you can do this in kind of multiple ways. Probably the easiest way to do this is by running in the green pool in the middle of the room, because like where Mannoroth's bones are, because that does do ticking damage to you, so you don't need to wait to take damage from something or anything like that. As soon as you get the debuff, you just run into the pool, make sure that no one else is nearby, and you'll be absolutely fine.
But the Doomlords do also cast something called Shadow Bolt Volley, which is just a Shadow Bolt Volley.
Yeah.
It just does damage to everyone in the entire raid. It is interruptible, but if people have marks, you might decide not to interrupt it just so the marks can be destroyed, and of course those players don't instantly die.
Now, the summoner on the far side of the room summons Fell Imps. Now, when he does this, he causes a large amount of firebolts to come crashing down at players' locations, and it will deal some fire damage from 3 yards, so make sure you're at least kind of spread out a little bit so you don't just take a shit ton of damage. And when these fireballs land, they will spawn imps. Now, these imps will just spam cast Fell Blast, which just deals damage to a random player and anyone within 3 yards of them, so once again, remain spread. And they will also teleport around and about once they've been active for a little while, so every now and then they'll just like shift location, which is kind of annoying. But to be honest, you can get these down super quickly, especially if you have something like a Death Knight, mass script these all together into like a solar beam. They can't do anything, bless them.
Yeah,
they just absolutely annihilate. And even if they're kind of loosely stacked up, you can generally passively AoE them down nice and quickly anyway. So these aren't a big deal. Just make sure you do get rid of them before they start teleporting around, because otherwise you just might be a little bit overwhelmed.
And the last summoner that we move around to kill off is the left one, and this guy summons Dread Infernals. When they spawn, a large targeting circle will like indicate exactly where they're going to land, and if you're stood in this location, you'll take a load of damage when they do actually finally land, so you need to make sure that you move away from them. Now, all these Infernals will do is just channel something called Hellfire. This just deals fire damage to anyone within 10 yards of them, and this channel's around 17 seconds long, so they do stand in place for quite a long time. At the end of their cast, they will just relocate into a brand new area, so it just repeats. You just need to keep moving from the circles and make sure you're not within 10 yards of them. Now, because these mobs do AoE around themselves, melee are kind of useless here. They can't really get any damage on them without taking a load of damage themselves. So you kind of need your range to deal with these guys, but you don't really need to focus them. You just sort of need to make sure you dot them up and just avoid the circles.
So they are all the ads that you deal with in phase 1. It is entirely up to you what order you want to kill them, because of course you can choose which summoner order you destroy, but we did decide to get rid of the Doomlords first because they did cause the most amount of problems because they've got all these debuffs that you need to deal with properly rather than, oh, AoE them. You actually had to think a little bit, so fuck that. Get rid of them quickly. Then we did the Imps and the Infernals, but once again, it is entirely up to you, and once all the 3 summoners have been killed, phase 2 will start. Now in phase 2, the Infernals and Fel Imps will start spawning again. However, the Doomlords will no longer spawn. But now you have to deal with Mannoroth himself in his little weakened skeletal form. He looks so cool, but yeah, look amazing. You do need to kill him now. Now, an ability that he does that your tanks need to worry about, and this really, really is something you need to worry about, at least on the PTR, is something called the Glaive combo. And this is pretty much a combo of 2 different abilities the tanks need to deal with. The first of which is something called Glaive Thrust. This just deals a huge amount of physical damage to the tank and applies a hard-hitting dot. However, this dot will not apply if you have some form of active mitigation up. So the idea is have some form of active mitigation up, otherwise you'll get a horrible dot. Crazy, right? But the main thing is that he does something called Massive Blast. Now, this will hit the tank for a huge amount of shadow damage, so your armor isn't helping you here, and you will be sent flying across the platform. And this does leave a debuff on you that increases the amount of damage you take from Massive Blast by 300% for 45 seconds. Now, the way that these abilities come in is that Mannoroth will generally do a Glaive Thrust into a Massive Blast into another Glaive Thrust. So we found the best way to deal with this is to have one tank take the first Glaive Thrust and then get hit back by the Massive Blast, while of course using as much damage reductions as you can because you're about to be hit by 2 huge abilities, and then having the second tank taunt as soon as possible as the first tank is flying through the air. So he'll take the last Glaive Thrust. On PTR, the boss could hit you with the Glaive Thrust as you were being knocked through the air, pretty much one-shotting you. Yeah. It was a mess, and sometimes he doesn't always do this ability in the correct order. Sometimes he does double Glaive Thrust into Massive, but he doesn't care.
And the cast time of this Glaive Thrust is tiny. Yeah. It's like 0.5 seconds. You have virtually no time to react to it. So
yeah, once we actually got some like good pulls in, the only people that were dying is the tanks because they got like one shot because there was just like no way of dealing with it. So yeah, it was a pretty vicious. So pretty much the way that you got to deal with it is hope that he does it in the right order, and generally taunt after the Massive Blast. That seems to be always the thing to do. Just make sure you taunt after that, and of course, when the next Massive Blast comes in, make sure the second tank or the tank without the debuff does take it, because otherwise the first tank's going to be taking a shit ton more damage.
Now, for your raid to worry about is something called Hellstorm. This just spawns a load of meteors over like a 5-second period. They're marked by like little dark circles on the ground. If you're stood in these dark circles, when it lands, you take a shit ton of damage. Yeah. So the idea is move out the circle, take no damage, everyone wins. Another ability the boss has is something called Mannoroth's Gaze, and this is probably the most sort of like difficult ability to deal with out of everything. This puts a debuff on random players that makes them feared for 8 seconds. When the fear times out, or when you decide to dispel it, the feared player will just take a ginormous amount of shadow damage. It's pretty much just going to one-shot them. However, anyone within their targeting circle, they get like a 5-yard targeting circle around them. If you stand inside this, the damage is split between everyone.
So the idea is that we'll just have the entire raid stacked up, and as soon as that fear came in, we just instantly dispelled it with either Mass Dispel, Tremor Totem, or just individual dispels. Just get rid of it really quickly. This means that we didn't have to like run around trying to stack up under these players who were feared and running all random directions. It just made it super easy. However, just as a note for this ability, when we were testing this boss on Mythic mode, which was done a couple of weeks later, you couldn't dispel the debuff anymore. So whether or not that is going to translate over to the heroic mode, we're not 100% sure, but either way, that's how we dealt with it, but you might need to be running around in order to soak this damage.
And the last ability that you'll have to deal with in this phase is something called Felseeker. Now, this is a series of 3 explosions that start and remain on one random player's location. The first explosion is really small, but the next 2 get larger and larger and deal more and more damage. So in order for us to sort of keep this ability clean, we just made sure the entire raid was stacked up, because of course it kind of helps with the other abilities as well. And as soon as the first one spawns, we all just moved as a group to a set location on the other side of the boss. So they're all the abilities you have to deal with, but on top of this, of course, we still have the Infernals up. And they still jump around and be annoying. You still need to make sure you kill them off. And if you are stacked, this can be kind of deadly. Providing you react super quickly, it's fine. Like, you won't take the massive burst of damage. So while they're up, we just made sure we nuke them off as soon as we possibly can. And it was pretty much the same situation for the Fel Imps. Again, they will still spawn on top of you. Providing you're spread out slightly, I think it's what, roughly 3 yards. You should be fine. But yeah, we just made sure if ad spawned, we just blow them up first and then went straight back to the boss. So providing you can continue dealing with all those abilities until roughly 65%, the boss will then transition into phase 3.
Now, at the beginning of this phase, Mannoroth actually gets his flesh back, which is nice. I'm sure he was getting quite chilly. However, the imps will no longer spawn in this phase, so you're just going to have the Infernals spawning. Now, Mannoroth does keep the same abilities, however, he does gain one additional ability, which is called Shadow Force. Now, this will debuff 3 people with this Shadow Force and start pushing them off the side of the platform. And at first, it isn't really fast, but it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. Now, the pushback effect actually comes from Mannoroth himself. So we had Mannoroth positioned on one side of the room and had the raid stacked up towards the center. So you pretty much, that made it so when the pushback came in, you had as much room as possible instead of just getting instantly thrown off the side. Now, after the Shadow Force does end, you do get a brief movement speed buff, so you can move very quickly back to the middle of the room. So it was pretty easy to deal with, just run against it and then just stack back up with everyone else.
But apart from that, everything else in this phase is pretty much the same as the last phase, except you no longer have to deal with the imps, which is kind of nice, I guess. So just kill off the Infernals, keep killing the boss. Tanks, make sure you keep doing the same thing you were doing before with the glaive combo. However you did that.
Yeah.
And apart from that, you just keep going. Once you've got the boss to 35%, this is when the 4th phase will start.
Mannoroth goes completely insane in this phase. He pretty much empowers all of his abilities. No Infernal spawn anymore. Hooray! But that ain't gonna help you because literally every single one of his abilities is empowered, but he doesn't gain a new one, which is great. Now, when Shadow Force is empowered, it does the exact same thing as it did beforehand, you know, pushing players off the side of the room. However, this is done to everyone.
Yeah,
now.
Every single player in the raid now has to push against it.
You just deal with it the exact same way, but it just looks a hell of a lot more awesome with everyone trying to scramble, like not to fall off the edge of the room. Just run towards the boss and make sure you're not positioned near the side of the room and you'll be absolutely fine. Now, empowered Foulstorm, instead of this lasting a couple of seconds, this seems to now last permanently. At the start, there isn't that many meteors dropping, however, more and more start spawning as the phase goes on, and it seems to pretty much cover the entire room. So wherever you are, you're going to have to move a little bit because of these meteors. Now, you can still avoid all of the damage just by moving from the shadow circles. However, moving all the time is going to demolish your DPS, so this, I don't really know how you're going to deal with this later on in the phase, because you're just going to have to, like, permanently move. Some classes are going to get screwed, but yeah, it's going to get pretty crazy. Now, the empowered Felseeker works the exact same way. However, the whole raid will now take damage from each blast, even if they're not within the targeting circle. And the damage you take from this is reduced the further away you are from it. So the idea is that you just run really far away from it. I guess I assume the best way of dealing with this is trying to place it in one corner of the room and having the whole raid move like very far away of it. Maybe like kind of similar to the way that you deal with a Black Hand or Mythic, maybe. Who knows, just move away from the big scary circles and you should maybe be okay. Now, the empowered Mannoroth's Gaze, this will still debuff 3 players and cause them to be feared and run around for 8 seconds, and the damage that you take at the end is of course split between anyone that is nearby. However, at the end of the debuff, a giant like defile pool of deathy badness will spawn, and the size of this pool is based on the amount of people who soaked the damage from the ability, you know, the split damage. So the more people that are hit by it, the bigger the pool will be. We only got to see this ability once, and we was just like, I wonder how it works. Let's all stack into it. Yeah, it insta-killed half our raid.
Yeah.
So generally, I think the idea is that you want to have the least amount of people soaking this ability so you can minimize the giant defile pools.
Yeah.
So you probably want maybe like 2 or 3 people per Mannoroth's Gaze, depending on the size of your group. So yeah, it's scary. Don't spawn giant, horrible pools everywhere.
And the last thing to talk about in this phase is the empowered glaive combo. Glaive Thrust works the same, however it now does a cleave in front of the boss rather than just a hit on the tank. This means you can only have one tank in front of the boss and no one else, otherwise you're just going to take way too much damage. Massive Blast, however, is still only single target, however the boss will also send out waves in front of him. So once you knock back, as you're running back towards the boss, you also have to dodge these waves. If you don't dodge these waves, you'll also be knocked back again, which means potentially you could be comboed and just thrown off the fucking platform.
It's like being hit by another massive blast. Instead of it being a melee hit, it's just a wave on the floor. And the really, really bad thing is that at least on PTR, you could be hit by the massive blast and a wave at the exact same point, just literally insta-killing you. You need an immunity to deal with that kind of level of damage. But hopefully they fix that. And pretty much when this Empowered Glaive combo comes in, face the boss, or just make sure you're not in front of the boss, because there's loads of bad shit going out from the front of him, and you should be absolutely fine. But I don't really know how you're going to deal with this last phase. It's going to be pretty clutch.
It's hectic as shit.
Yeah.
It would literally be save your pot, save your CDs, save your Bloodlust, and as soon as that second is transitioned,
yeah,
you just pop everything and just try and kill him before you kill you, because there are so many abilities going on. And the boss is still kind of high health, 35% is still kind of high, so you just need to literally just kill him, and everyone needs to play perfectly, pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult heroic boss, which is surprising. And what do you think? Do you think it's a good one?
I think it was awesome. I really, really liked it.
It was fun to test.
It was very fun to test, and I like the fact that Gul'dan is flying about and destroying all the pillars to empower Mannoroth to try and bring him back to his former glory, and it's just really, really good. It's a really, really fun fight. It's going to be hard as nails, so hopefully they reduce the tank damage. That is my main thing with it.
Yeah.
For heroic, it seems a little high. Like, yeah, okay, make it so the tanks need to do something to reduce the amount of damage they're taking, but our tanks were, like, bless them, they were just getting completely destroyed. So hopefully they can do something to make it so it's not too bad. But overall, a really cool fight.
But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this little preview, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. And we shall see you on the live stream.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.